So in the late evening of June 16th, I was actually concluding a business trip to Southern California, and I was driving back to the Los Angeles airport. I was listening to the radio, I was listening to NPR, trying to catch up on the news of the day. And over the radio came the shocking news that, actually by now is old news, that Whole Foods Market would be acquired by Amazon for $14 billion. A 37-year-old company with $1.4 billion of annual profits, 460 stores across North America and England, famous for creating unparalleled experiences with cuisine and organic foods, was going to be bought by a 23-year-old digital company that had never made a profit and which operated one small pilot grocery store in Seattle. Now, this grocery store has no human clerks. It's loaded with artificial intelligence. What's striking about this is this wasn't grocery on grocery acquisition by an industry peer. This was a bold outsider with a big idea and a massive valuation, and they're about to turn an old industry on its head. And how'd the world respond? Standing ovation, high five, attaboy. I immediately pulled over. I quickly located my iPhone. I safely exited the freeway. I had to buy gas anyway. But I got the iPhone out because I really wanted to see what the impact was on the veteran grocery store chains, the peers of Whole Foods. And what I discovered literally just scared the hell out of me. Kroger was down 11% in afternoon trading, and in 2017 so far this year, their stock's down 31%. On June 16th, SuperValue had dropped 14%, and even Costco and Walmart were each down 6%. The financial markets had leveled their judgment. Massive change in one day had come to the grocery industry, and it was coming from the outside in. This was happening to the industry, not by the industry. Investors were placing their bets, and they were placing them on the outsiders. So my immediate thought was clinical and arresting. We could be next. We could be next. An honest evaluation highlights our vulnerability. I want you to consider two factors. First, the annual Fortune 500 list just came out, maybe less than a month ago. And in it, the engineering and construction sector, out of the 500 companies, was represented by only 5 companies. Now collectively, or 7 companies, and collectively these 7 companies made 1.8% profit on $77 billion of revenue. 1.8% profit. Financially speaking, if you're on Wall Street, that's really poor performance. Let's just be honest. Also consider for a moment that the market capitalization of the largest member of this group, Fluor, is 1/3 of Snapchat. 1/3. This causes me great distress. I mean, think about this for a moment. We have a world-class blue-chip global corporation that's incredibly known around the world for building things that truly matter to humanity, like energy, minerals, infrastructure, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, you name it. They have 1/3 the market value of a quick signal mobile communication app. I hope this causes you great distress as well. Because while I consider our industry to be incredibly and tremendously valuable, the market doesn't value us. They don't value us at all. So the second factor, and I call it the boring story, but I don't mean boring as in dull, I mean boring as in tunneling. After all, how can it be boring when it comes from the mind of Elon Musk? This guy has become world famous by now. He's behind Tesla, SpaceX, Hyperloop, and he has a bold idea for our industry. So he's stuck in heavy traffic one day. He's probably sitting in a Tesla. And he begins wishing for a series of tunnels underneath all our major American cities. He wants to do this to alleviate traffic congestion. So he does what any person who has billions and billions of dollars does. He buys a tunnel boring machine, because that's what you do when you have billions of dollars. And then he begins taking it apart. And this is really only 9 to 12 months ago that he started to do this. What he contends at this point is that he can reduce the cost of constructing tunnels by a factor of 10, and he can increase the speed by a factor of 14, so 14 times as fast. Now, those of us in this room might respond to Elon Musk's proclamation, with a loud and collective eye roll, like, oh yeah, good luck with that. But I suspect that's exactly how members of the National Grocers Association responded to Jeff Bezos when on December 5th of 2016, he announced that Amazon would open a grocery store in Seattle, one that was free of checkouts. So I want you to imagine this scenario. Imagine it's 2 years from now, it's August of 2019, and a group of East Coast states are getting together. They're meeting with investment bankers and developers. They're talking about financing a new interstate tunnel to connect New York City with Washington, D.C., to alleviate traffic congestion in the region and really free up the economic potential of the region. Next, I want you to imagine that we walk into this pitch with the same plan the work the plan, stage gate, business model. That really we've been applying since the 1980s. Same cost structure, same schedule. Next, after we leave the room, Elon Musk and the Boring Company, which is what he calls it, stroll in as innovative outsiders with a track record of bold ideas and really new ideas, new way of thinking, and a proposed cost structure that's 10 times less expensive. But also consider that they have precisely no experience. I want you to imagine where the bankers are going to place their bet. So when you connect all these dots, I think this should really serve as an important wake-up call for those of us inside this industry. And really over the last 12 months, I've traveled the world. I've spoken with more than 4,000 people about the need for our industry to develop a new business model, a new operating platform that can really move us forward. And I'm super encouraged by these conversations. But in the most fundamental terms, I believe our imperative really is this. If we want to drive transformation in the capital project space from the inside, we need to think and operate more as business people and less as engineers. If we don't do this, change is still going to happen in our industry. But my fear it's going to be driven by outside forces, and we'll have missed a great opportunity. So over the next 25 minutes, and then we'll take some questions, I want to talk about 3 ways that we can think and operate more like business people. These are 3 ways that we can create immense value by working together to really slash the massive transactional costs that are inherent to this industry and achieve record levels of profitability. And when I say that, I mean for owners, contractors, suppliers, everybody who's in our industry. But we have to act soon, because these outsiders are already knocking on our door, and I guarantee you these people are not going to hesitate to come in and extract maximum profits for themselves. They will use our industry to extract maximum profits for ourselves. So these 3 ways that I believe that we can think and operate more like business people to transform our industry from the inside out are these. Number 1, flatten the supply chain. And they're kind of simple. Number 2, stretch each dollar. That one I can't emphasize enough. Number 3, shrink for agility. So let's start with flattening the supply chain. It's been said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and that's actually just business speak for finding something that works in one context and applying it in another. In engineering, we take that and we call it technology transfer. For example, on this, consider Boeing and the development of its 787 Dreamliner a few years ago. Boeing actually at the time believed that a great unmet need existed to connect smaller international markets using a medium-sized but long-range jet. So city pairs such as Seattle and Shanghai or Austin and London. And those were the targets. And at the same time, Airbus was betting differently. They thought, no, what really needs to happen is we need to make this huge plane that connect large international hubs such as New York and Paris with a plane that can hold more than 700 people. So as different and as great as this business idea was that Boeing had, Boeing also knew that the 787 would ultimately be uncompetitive if they followed their same typical centralized planning, design, and production process. So they recognized that a new, fast, and low-cost product development strategy was going to be needed. And that for the first time in 60 years, they borrowed heavily from work that had been done in the automotive sector, and they took themselves out of the lead development role, the lead engineering role, and the lead production role. And instead what they did is they created a single-layer transactional platform that placed their core suppliers in lead engineering and lead manufacturing roles. Boeing figured that this environment would reduce the overall program cost by 40% and that it would decrease the development time for the 787 program by 33% and result in a really competitive and profitable new aircraft. And they were exactly right. They took over a bunch of market share. The aircraft is 11% cheaper on average. They took back almost 17% market share. Their strategy relied mainly upon flattening the supply chain to 50 Tier 1 suppliers and about another 150 Tier 2 suppliers, and these were all connected together with a transactional platform called ExoStar, which is actually now a separate company. And while they all used a common design and fabrication, digital design and fabrication platform from Dassault Systems, Boeing's main role in this became supporting their suppliers and resolving any issues that crept up at interfaces. The results were both amazing and unexpected because technologically what the suppliers had done is they had created an all-electric aircraft. The 787 is the first Boeing product to every system runs electronically, from the flight controls and the avionics to the climate control, the pressurization, the anti-ice systems. Literally everything in the whole plane is electronic. But from a business standpoint, this single layer platform that they had created virtually eliminated purchase orders and all kinds of forms and waste in terms of transactional cost. The process of developing a major new aircraft at Boeing went from 20 major steps to 3. And that's how they got the cost out, and that's how they got the time out of the development of their new product. So now I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine if we imitated Boeing on our next capital program. What would that look like? Well, first I think it's important to realize that Boeing's leadership in this wasn't command and control. It wasn't top-down telling people what to do anymore. They're supporting them from the bottom up. This is sometimes called servant leadership, and you hear about that a lot in business talks and other types of things. And we could imitate that. But next, by moving to a single-layer platform with fewer steps, what really starts happening is you eliminate the waste and the mistakes that cost us a lot of time and money. We free up massive amounts of data. We free up these transactional costs that accumulate at each layer of our pyramid scheme. And yes, I did just call it a pyramid scheme. It's multiple layers of a pyramid scheme. What happens in a pyramid scheme is that at each layer of this pyramid, you're accumulating not just the base cost, but you have overhead and profit. And the base cost plus the overhead and profit becomes the base cost at the next layer of the pyramid, upon which is added overhead and profit, and that becomes the base cost at the next layer of the pyramid. And so what ends up happening is that it just becomes transactionally extremely expensive. This results in things like most capital projects, major capital projects, are overinsured by 350%. If, again, like I said yesterday, if you're wondering, if owners say these projects are way too expensive and contractors say they make no money, where's all the money going? It's going a lot of places, but they're mostly related to transactional costs. So I've done the math on this, and conservatively speaking, if you move from the pyramid to a single layer, conservatively, the total project cost is reduced by 22%, and the profitability for everybody involved increases by 262%. So you're making almost 3 times as much money, and I mean everybody in that whole chain. Suppliers, vendors, engineers, construction companies, you name it. Flattening the supply chain also does another thing. It eliminates this accumulation of inventory at every level of the pyramid. I often feel like I'm watching an episode of Hoarders when I look at our projects, because we've got all these materials accumulating in about 8 major places. They're in the supplier warehouse, they're in the distributor warehouse, they're at the subcontractor, they're in a marshaling yard, they're in an on-site laydown area, they're in an on-site warehouse, they're in some foreman's job box, they're in a vendor trailer. I mean, there is a lot of stuff out there, and most of this is specialized, special order parts. On a typical industrial project, you're looking at 72% of that. And none of this has been integrated with the people who make this and their production process. So this inventory costs us an amazing amount of money. And when I talk about transactional costs, that's where it's going. But then that's not even half of it, because you take all that inventory and you multiply it by 20 or 30 or 40 years in operation, and you really start to understand the scale of this problem. So when I say it's time to flatten the supply chain, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So let's talk a little bit about stretching each dollar then. If you watch TV, maybe I'm watching too much of it, billion-dollar buyer Tillman Fertitta, not often quoted at conferences, he said, don't ever let your business get ahead of the financial side of your business. Don't ever let your business get ahead of the financial side of your business. Accounting, accounting, accounting. Know your numbers. I think that's the problem. This is exactly what we've done as engineers, as project managers. We've forgotten the numbers. We emphasize the technical, the managerial, the process parts of our industry. But mainly, though, I think we're living off the wrong side of the dollar. This is the part of Wall Street wisdom that we don't yet understand. We live off the borrowing side of the dollar, not the accumulation side of the dollar. I was talking to my daughter about this, and I said, when you buy your first car, should you get a loan, or should you start saving some money right now and then buy it with that? And, obviously you guys know the answer, right? It would be much better to save up money, let the money build interest or often investment, and then ultimately make your purchase later on. But what we do in this industry is we put the work in place and then we bill for it. So we're always on the borrowing side of the dollar. And then when we actually get a dollar, we don't hang on to it. What we need to do is hang on to it for as long as possible to maximize what it can do for us. We shouldn't run this business like it's a checkbook. It's money in and money out. But that's basically generally what our projects do. And I have a term for this. I call it caveman. I call it caveman because most of the financial wisdom that exists in the world has not made its way into this industry at all. So it's going to be time for us to do a deep dive on accounting and finance and all of these things to bring these principles into what we're doing. And so we're going to change that. We're going to change that at CII. So let me start with a personal story about stretching a dollar, and this comes back to, it's really about the intersection of capital projects with finance. So from 1999 to 2002, when I was getting my PhD at Georgia Tech, I worked with this design firm, large architecture engineering firm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and their clients, such as Walmart and other large repetitive building owners. And so as the dot-com era was expanding, Walmart was actually missing their new store profits by $1.8 billion per year. And analysts on Wall Street looked at this and they lowered their expectation and valuations on the stock, and they said, well, the dot-com era is here, people want to shop online or they're shopping at other stores. But to Walmart, this didn't make any sense. And their business analysts opened the hood, they investigated a bit deeper, and they knew something was up because their existing store sales were right on target or even possibly ahead of projections. So when these analysts investigated further, they found out that the company was opening 450 stores in North America, but an average of 14 days late. And this was missing 900 weeks of revenue. Now, Walmart makes $2 million of profit, not revenue, $2 million of profit per week, each store. So that's $1.8 billion. That's where they're missing this. So over 14 months, what we did, our team working together with this architecture and engineering firm in Tulsa, we created and implemented 18 program management techniques. And these were all designed to recapture these revenue weeks from Walmart's annual portfolio. One of these techniques shown here on the diagram is called reslotting. Reslotting is where the unavoidable delays in one project, such as planning and zoning. Historically, you have problems with planning and zoning in Los Angeles and Southern California. That would be shown in red. You just move that down in the program, and all the other projects are moved up. The logic of this is it's easier to save 1 day on 80 projects than it is to save 80 days on one project. Now, the typical project management response to this is, on this red bar, on this project, let's throw resources at it. Let's work overtime. Let's do everything we can to pull that back. And ultimately, you might be successful in shedding 20 or 30 or even 40 days, but you're not going to get all 80 days back. So another technique besides reslotting was eliminating change orders in the field. And Walmart hasn't had a single field change order across 500 projects a year now in 15 years, because all the changes that they make are made in the model. Now, the Europeans have a term for this in manufacturing. They call it the digital twin, because exactly what they're building in reality is shown in the computer. This hasn't gone mainstream in our industry yet, but this is another thing that we're going to work on. As we integrate technology into CII, we're going to work on a digital twin. So when you combine all these 18 program management techniques together, what happened was that Walmart's total program accelerated to the point where their 450 stores were completed an average of 17 days early. They had actually picked up a full month versus where they were. And the result was a swing of $4 billion of annual profitability. Now, I'd like to say that I got a small chunk of that, and if I did, I wouldn't be standing in front of you today. But the other result of this was that Walmart's stock took off. The impact from the capital project had had a direct impact. Their ability to stretch the dollar had had a direct impact on their stock. And that's something that you can't often say in our business. So essentially what had happened now is that Walmart's real estate and facilities department, which is what it's called, had transitioned from being a cost center to being a profit center. So think about that as an owner. Think about your engineering, construction, facilities department as a profit center. And as that happened, the people at Walmart started increasingly thinking like business people, operating like business people. And they continued to work with their suppliers to find ways to stretch a dollar, every investment dollar that they had. So from rooftop HVAC units to security systems to concrete blocks and shopping carts, they leveraged every capital dollar they had to continually acquire more, continually do more with less. And eventually what happened is this led them to pursue sustainability, not because they were so interested in saving the planet, that's a nice side benefit, but really it was about the savings and the cost that was able to be generated by their facilities. You may not realize this, but during the day, Walmart has no artificial lighting. They save all that operating expense. And actually, you're getting to the point where almost a third of them generate more power than they consume. Their actual cost of the building is cheaper today than it was 20 years ago, after being adjusted for inflation. So what had happened is they started blending the capital required to build the facility with the operating expenses, and they now are at the point where their new stores program is funded using some pretty sophisticated financial vehicles. Why is this example of Walmart important? I think because the future of our industry, it's going to really be about our industry's ability to directly develop projects using potentially private equity and other sorts of investment. The traditional owner, 5 years from now, is going to comprise 1/3 of the funding for projects. 2/3 will be something else. We have to transition to that. So all the people who are in business development from engineering, construction firms, listen to that. You're only chasing 1/3 of the money. And like Walmart, we're going to have to demonstrate that we're financially savvy and we're capable of generating returns and not just cost. That's the key to this. We're going to basically have to come out of the cave and show that we know how to stretch a dollar. Lastly, comes to shrinking for agility. We have to think much smaller in what we build. Most of what we design and build is entirely at the wrong scale. So I want you to think about miniaturization, not modularization. What do I mean by miniaturization? Well, think about this. How is the Boring Company going to take 10 times of the cost out of its project? You know, they're going to do this, reduce the cost by a factor of 10. Or decrease cost by 1,000%. Well, mostly they're going to do it by going from a tunnel diameter of 28 feet to 14 foot, because that reduces the volume of material that you have to excavate by 400%. Use the old theorem, right? Pi squared r, area of a circle. Okay, so now you can argue that, fine, you just reduced 400%, but now you're going to need a second tunnel. And that's probably true, but that's the part of our industry that we're good at, which is repetition. We know that by the 4th time we do something, our productivity is 40% better on the 4th time you do something. Think about any home repairs, anything that you do. The 4th time that you do this, you're 40% faster at it. It's economy of scale and economy of repetition. Those are two important concepts for our industry. What we basically do here is we build a prototype. Every project's custom designed. Every project is custom implementation. It's almost a miracle that they all work, because look at any other industry that builds prototypes. The Corvette at the auto show, that's going to be the Corvette 3 years from now, that doesn't run. It's not all figured out. It's just a prototype. It's an example of design. What we have to capitalize is on this economy of scale and economy of repetition. So shrinking the scale of what we build and design enables us to go really fast. It allows us to standardize more, it allows us to modularize more, it allows us to put more of this in a manufacturing environment, and we know the manufacturing environment is safer. It's climate controlled, it's more productive. We can attract workers to a manufacturing environment. We should really seek to limit the amount of stuff that we do outside. But actually, that's just the technical and the managerial side of this. The real value of shrinking the scale is the agility and the financial returns that are afforded by shrinking for agility. These returns would come and accumulate to our business. So here's my challenge. The next time you're faced with the prospect of 100,000 barrel a day unit to design and build, I don't want you to think about trying to do this with 20 unique modules. That's actually old school. Instead, think about designing and building a self-contained unit of 5,000 barrels per day, and then repeat it 20 times. The huge difference in what I'm talking about is that the business can change on a day's notice. They can change the capacity of the asset at any moment in time, as long as it comes in 5,000 barrel increments. So 80,000 barrels a day, 2 days later, they want 120,000 barrels a day, 200,000 barrels a day, completely possible, but this is not possible in our current model. It won't work. So an industrial asset of the type that's pictured, and what I'm talking about, also has no shutdown or turnaround. Because like a high-rise hotel, all you're going to do is take one unit out of service, take it off site, recondition it, bring it back, put it back into service. If you start thinking about the life cycle cost that way, you can really make some big gains. And before you think all of what I'm talking about on this is just science fiction, I want you to consider all the work that's currently going into small modular reactors. These are reactors of 80 or 100 or 150 megawatts each. Most of these are self-contained. The actual scale you see on the slide is true. The traditional one is shown on the right. The small modular reactor is shown on the left, and they're to scale. If you do this, any utility can basically just decide how many of these they want to install. They can scale up or down infinitely. Contrast that to the picture on the right of units over 1,000 megawatts that some are under construction. We heard yesterday some have abandoned construction around the world. Miniaturization, that's what's going to take us to the next place. And that's what's shrinking for agility. Check out this quote from Venture Global LNG. Now, this is a company, they're vying for licenses to build and operate 2 LNG plants in the United States, export terminals for natural gas. May not all happen, but the quote's interesting. So their senior vice president of engineering, he says, "We use reliable, proven technology in an innovative plant design configuration. Our modular, mid-scale plant design will replace traditional designs as it allows for the same efficiency and operational reliability at significantly lower capital cost." And this is at the heart of our project strategy. What I would submit to you is they're moving in the right direction, but they're not all the way there yet. Mid-scale. How about small scale? So I would actually push back on Brian and tell him, that's good, you're going in the right direction, but you're not quite there yet. The other way to shrink for agility and gain agility is by reducing the footprint. So my key example here is the air separations business. They're building facilities today that have the same capacity but use only 25% of the footprint. They have shrunk the footprint of the facility by 75% in just 20 years. How'd they do this? Here again, they look to their suppliers. The suppliers are really a key to our future. They really began reinventing the equipment that they're installing in the field. So typically in an industrial facility, what you'll see is one piece of equipment performs one function, and they're connected together by a whole series of interconnecting piping and wires and whatever. But companies like Linde and Air Products, Praxair, they figured out how to work with the suppliers and get one piece of equipment that sometimes does 5 or 6 functions. So you can think about functions like purification, dehydration, refrigeration, compression. And actually, I recently met with the director of engineering for Linde in Germany, and he told me not only have they shrunk the footprint of the facility by 75%, but they're now able to do their engineering 50% faster, mostly because they invested in optimizing their process, and that's another key to us, optimizing the process. So for those of you in the molecule-based industries, we've really abandoned that in the last 3 or 4 decades. There's not a lot of new licensor package or technology. So they invested in optimizing their process design, and then they're maintaining all this in an interim product database. How many have ever heard of interim product database? If you were at CII conference 12 years ago, you would have heard about it. It was actually the subject of our shipbuilding research. We had 2 research teams, 232 and 235. And they advocated having an interim product design database, really a library of component designs that could really reduce the cost and increase the speed of our new capital facilities. And so that really brings me full circle to the end of my comments this morning. Usually, there's some real golden nuggets and key findings in the work that we do at CII. You saw some of that yesterday. You're going to see some more of it today. Pay attention, because this can either immediately impact your business, it could impact it 2 years from now, 6 years from now, or if you've been paying attention 12 years ago, it would be impacting your business right now, like Linde. You can also discover all of this in the CI knowledge base. Everything that CI has done for 34 years is in that knowledge base. And if you don't know what interim product database is, I'd encourage you to go to knowledge base and figure that out. Because if you've read the recent news, you'll know that Linde is now acquiring Praxair. It's come full circle to impacting the financial side of their business. That's the kind of financial returns and profitability that we're seeking for all of our clients, for all of our companies, suppliers, engineering companies, construction companies, owner companies. What I would tell you is that the next several years at CII is really about cracking the code to vastly improve the business performance of our industry. I said yesterday, CII of the past might have been about improving the capital project. CII of the future is about using the capital project to improve the business performance. And that's for everybody, owners, contractors, engineering firms, suppliers. So beginning in 2018, CII is embarking on an exciting new journey. We're working with other industry groups and companies around the world to really innovate, disrupt, and transform our business. And I really want you to continue to come along with us and jump in and get involved. Our name for this at this point is Operating System 2.0. We're taking on Operating System 1.0 that's been around since the pyramids, literally. The plan the work the plan, stage gate business model. And I know when we get there, we're going to have tremendous success, like all the examples I showed you today, from Boeing to Walmart to Linde. We have some good examples out there, but now what we have to do is come together as an industry and really make that our new model, our new business model, our new operating platform, getting to that single platform, reusing the dollars. We have massive amounts of dollars. And quite frankly, I'm always amazed that some smart finance MBA type person hasn't come in here and just rated us, because there's no product that you can buy that's more expensive than a capital project. You think a car or a house is expensive? That's a fraction of the expense of a major capital project. And Sam Walton actually once said that a very small percentage of an extremely large number is still a huge number. And that's why I'm saying, some finance MBA, why did they not come in here and take a very small percentage of an extremely large number? Except maybe they did, right? Investment bankers, financial types. Those are the returns that should be accumulating to the people who are actually doing the work. I'm continually dismayed that you can have a group of 20 or 30 people working in an office building in Manhattan. They put the due diligence together, they put the financing together, and then they're done in 6 weeks. 20 people work for 6 weeks, and they make probably 3, 6, 10 times as much money as all the thousands of people that work for 4 years to design and build these facilities. That's not right. That's not equitable, considering all the work and the investment and the sweat and the blood and the tears and everything that goes into this. So when we get to this stage, when we get to OS2, or whatever we're going to call it, I know that together we can be extremely successful doing this, and we can really transform this industry from the inside out. Mostly, though, my purpose today, this morning, besides hopefully being a bit provocative, is to really challenge you to begin thinking more like a business person and less like an engineer. I put this cartoon up here because this is the one place you can see where the engineer is the hero and the business person isn't. There's not many examples of this, but Dilbert's one. And instead of just pretending to add value, we're going to really add value. And I think that CII is the catalyst for that. It can start here. It depends on you all, volunteering, rolling up your sleeves, getting involved. But I guarantee you, when you do, your businesses will never be the same. Your working lives will never be the same. These projects are going to be dramatically better. So we have lofty goals. It's a lot to, promise and live up to, but I think we can do it. So I appreciate your attention this morning, and I think we do have some time for questions. We have some microphones, and If you think what I'm telling you is not right, I want to hear from you. Or if you have questions about anything that I've talked about or any of the examples that I've talked about, really appreciate if you want to go to one of the microphones and ask a question.
Thanks for the topic, and since one of the things we're talking about is disrupt, I think you're creating a little bit of a false equivalency between investment bankers and what we do, because I'll throw out the premise that what we do in this building is create value, and I will say that the investment bankers extract value. So I think the elephant in the room is every conference we go to is about collaboration. How do we connect the value creation with the end product with what we do in this room? Because we all agree collaboration is the key, but how do we get finance, legal, procurement all on board with what we're talking about today?
Right, it's a great question. And actually the setup for our panel yesterday, you saw a number of questions to the panel about the idea of really one-time close, financing through concession agreements and public-private partnerships over a 20, 30, 40-year span. I think when you start blending the operating part and the construction part together, you automatically start being involved in the conversation as the engineering, as the construction companies. You're involved in this conversation about the financing part of it. But it's incumbent on us not to just relegate that to somebody else. You know, those investment bankers will take care of that. We don't need to worry about that. No, we need to be part of that. In fact, we could be the financing vehicles ourselves. It may start first with some of the private companies who actually do some of that work. But I think, you know, we can develop a better partnership. I agree with the analogy that, or the statement that, you know, we're creating value and other people are sucking it out of us. That's true. And that's actually what I contend with all these transactional costs is that, you know, we're just shipping the money elsewhere and we're not retaining that for our owners, operators, engineering, construction firms. And that's really what we need to be doing. In saying that, what would we do at CII about this? So largely we've been focused on, you know, research and development around the work process related to our industry. And we've largely approached it from a very technical or engineering standpoint. So I think going forward you'll see a more diverse crowd of principal investigators that are looking at legal and finance and accounting type issues in addition to the technical and managerial aspects of what we do. Because if we put that all together, we're going to find some real opportunities at some of those interfaces. And in addition to that, it's not just the process part, it's the people and the technology, because you really need all three: people, process, and technology. So elevating the people, elevating their business acumen, their understanding of organizational behavior, emotional intelligence, understanding what agility looks like. You know, all of these things are quite important to us. And as our people get more skilled in that area and they begin to think more like business people and less like engineers, you also see a lot more opportunity there. The young people who work for you, for your companies, they actually are excited by this environment. So it's a natural direction that we're going in, but it can be a little bit scary because you're really fighting the status quo. So hopefully I'm addressing that question. Other questions?
Morning, Stephen.
Good morning.
Great talk. Just a couple of comments first. So going back to the triangle and the flattened line,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you look at the pyramid, and CII has existed in that pyramid model for a while, as we all have in our businesses. Most of the people here that are in that pyramid are somewhere in the middle of that pyramid, down in the food chain. Yesterday we had a great panel at the end of the day. We had some leaders here. In November we've got another board meeting coming up, and we're going to have pretty much a lot of the same people that are here in that board meeting. so this is more of a statement than a question, but you know, if we're going to innovate, disrupt, transform, and get business value out of capital projects, we need the business people here as well, but not in that pyramid formation, but in a flat formation so that the engineers, the constructors, and the business leaders are working side by side, not in that triangular hierarchical format, but on a flat format, as people working with each other as opposed to for each other. And you can't build that plant without the engineer, but you can't build that plant without the finance guy, you can't build it without the lawyer. And too often we don't work together, we don't collaborate because of that structure. And if we want to continue to move down the getting business value out of capital projects, we need the business people here as well.
I think 1,000% correct. And within a lot of the owner shops, you have, you know, the business unit, the strategic business unit, project sponsor people or finance people, and you have the project people. And a lot of times these people are like oil and water. They're not in the same conversations. They're not in the room at the same time. Michael, I think you're exactly right. But also it's worse than that because it's sequential. This is drawn out over time. The business unit will come up with an idea, however feasible or infeasible it might be, check it over the wall, and you know, it just lands on the owner's engineering, construction, facilities department, and then they're supposed to do something with it. So being part of that conversation is about providing the strategic value. And actually, at the conference last year, we had a study that we had worked on with Continuum Advisory Group between CII and CAG, and it was called Order Takers or Value Creators, you know, and was really focused on the owner in exactly this. Are these owner engineering construction departments just taking orders, waiting for the phone to ring, oh, we need a new facility? Or are they actually being part of the project strategy and part of the solution? So one of the benefits of getting rid of the pyramid and going to a flatten, you know, the bar, single layer transactional platform is everybody in this entire value chain they don't have to wait to be contacted from above. They don't have to wait on that time scale for those orders to trickle down. They just apply their wares directly. And when I said that Boeing eliminated purchase orders, that's exactly what happened. When they went to the ExoStar single layer platform, anybody who could provide those services, they were encouraged to, you know, reinvent the mousetrap and apply it directly. And that went for absolutely everything, whether it was a part, whether it was an engineering service, whether it was a finance vehicle, anything. You know, we need the best and the brightest to just apply their knowledge directly. So when we get to the board meeting, you know, a real challenge that CII has is exactly what Michael describes, is we need to get our business leaders, our project sponsors, our business units in the room. So one thing that a lot of our owner crowd or even our contractor crowd could do is invite these project sponsors, invite these business unit leads to CII. I think what you'll find in the board meeting and going forward into 2018 is there'll be something here for them. They'll recognize the business discussion that we're going to have. We will be talking about finance and accounting. And the really great part about that for everybody in the middle, as Michael's describing, is that this really supercharges your personal careers. This supercharges what you're doing inside your companies, because it's always true that the people who rise up into leadership positions in our companies are people who speak the language of business. So if you just keep speaking the language of engineering, it becomes difficult to get into executive levels where really you are talking about finance and tax and accounting and all these other types of issues. That's why you see engineers continually go and night program MBA, weekend MBA, you know, because they're trying to get that level of business acumen so that they can improve their careers. We are not going to convince the executives to start speaking the language of engineering, right? Not to be rude, but they went to college and they couldn't handle the math, and so it's not going to happen. So it's incumbent on us to actually raise our level of understanding and invite these people to be part of our conversation, and we can do that at CII. So thanks, Michael.
Jesse Lund, thank you so much for the conversation. I think it's a little bit scary because it isn't the only example, whether it's taxis and Ubers or Blockbuster and Netflix, which a quick tidbit about Netflix, which will lead into my question, is Tidbit's internal user content is very profitable, and it's because it actually analyzes when you pause, when you fast forward, and they create all of their content based on that analysis. So I think for us as an industry, it is you look at the base level of data analytics and advanced analytics, and how is it that we're using the information to then make those business decisions, which I think a lot of these technology companies, manufacturing companies do. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that and how it would apply here.
Yeah, that's an amazingly great question. Thank you. Yeah, the value of the data. I mean, this is one of the things that's probably the scariest for us, because as engineering firms, we think that everything that we do is proprietary to our design, to the way that we did the engineering, whatever, and we hoard that. We keep it under lock and key. One other story about Jeff Bezos and Amazon, about 12 or 15 years ago, he actually made a proclamation across the company, sent an email to absolutely every single employee, and it said, if you do not take the data that you're working on and make it publicly available, open source, you will be fired. I mean, that's absolutely shocking to companies in our business. But what he recognized was that if you do that, if you free up the data, you open yourselves up to new sources of revenue. The data that we possess on these projects, on the engineering and the construction part, you know, we can acquire this. We can acquire it through our systems, through our design platforms, you know, Caterpillar, every movement of their machines. It's a continual live data stream. And if we free that up, we can actually get immense value. It's been interesting to me because we've been benchmarking healthcare facilities for really almost 10 years, but recently, in the last couple years, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and the military health system actually freed up all their data. They post it live. And the whole idea is they're eager to have anybody come in and talk to them about better ways of going about their facility program. So they've just made all that data publicly available. That's an interesting thing when the Department of Defense frees up all its data and makes it publicly available. But what the technology companies, Netflix, Amazon, whoever, have proved is that there's tremendous value in actually freeing up that data. So that's a challenge for us, is to figure out ways to do that. For CII, that means how are we going to figure this out? That's, again, part of the logic of incorporating technology, FIATech, into this discussion. There certainly are security concerns about making publicly available, you know, operating pressures of vessels and stuff like this, right? So we have to think our way through that. But in general, freeing up this data is really what will take us to our future. So thank you. Hopefully I answered your question.
Stephen, Mark Smith from Deloitte. So I particularly enjoyed your comments for obvious reasons. My question to you, I've been operating overseas the past 10 years, so it's good to be home back to the U.S. But I was wondering, in your 4,000 observation comments that you've had, you know, around the world, whether you see the wave coming where you have foreign corporations coming to the U.S. To build new facilities, manufacturing facilities, and essentially demanding a different way of, as you mentioned, financing, building, operating, and whether you've had those conversations and you see this wave coming. I think I kind of see it. And that if we don't kind of think in a new way, we will have foreign competition coming in to do those projects. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, and so some of those conversations around the world is Korea, Singapore, Europe. Obviously, people bring up this, but in general, what I would also tell you is the rest of the world is hungry for the best practices and what we have. So most of the time, they're trying to catch up to speed on our safety or our approach to productivity or whatever. And the part where they're competitive, a lot of times it's unit rates, wage rates, something like that. As they come into North America, I think could potentially be difficult for them. But there are some key elements of some of these businesses, the Korean contractors and they don't approach the projects in exactly the same way we do, and potentially there's some nuggets there that offer some competitive advantage, and that's probably what they're going to try to capitalize on. North America, though, I think the answer is always going to be innovation. Like, we've proven that if we can just stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of the rest of the world, there's tremendous value in that. And so that's why the name of the conference is Innovate, Disrupt, Transform, because if we can stay a step ahead on the innovation part, I think we can stay a step ahead of the rest of the world. That's been true really since World War II. That's really what's driven the profitability in American business. So hopefully I'm answering the question. I think there are some challenges on the horizon as other people come in here, but I think if we just stay 1 step ahead, we'll stay in the lead, really.
Hello, Stephen. My name's Keith Henson, and I work for Williams Pipeline. And I have a question for you. I listened to the CEOs yesterday in the panel review, and one part of the equation that kept coming up in their talks was regulation. And I was wondering, is there any room in 2.0 for regulation, because our industry is just losing a lot of value through permitting process, and that's what I heard yesterday in the conversation with CEO as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously it's a complex problem. We have our Power Utilities Infrastructure Committee sector, and that's exactly their research topic right now, is how to deal with impact of regulation, but certainly that's not the only sector that's affected by it. One of the things when we go through the research and development effort for a new operating system is to really have an extremely diverse set of stakeholders, and that would include government agencies. I think at some base level, they recognize that improvement in driving innovation and moving the economy and the industry forward is a core value. I was honestly 6 or 7 years ago when the VA and the Department of Defense funded our healthcare benchmarking. They said, when I was asking them, like, you're sure if we free up this data, we make it publicly available to everybody? And they said, yeah, one of the purposes of government is to improve industry, and we think that this is a way to do it. So I'm always encouraged that there are some government people out there that, they don't want to hold us back. They want to free this up, and I do believe that they understand, especially if we can increase our profitability by 262%, well, 33% or 34% of that, or whatever the corporate tax rate is, 34% of 262% improved profitability means almost 3 times more tax revenue, right? So I think if we can just start explaining some of the advantages to that, and we can have the government and the regulators in the room with us as we invent this new path forward, I think there is a lot of promise. But I'm also not naive enough to say that it's not going to be an uphill challenge, because I think what we discover is after decades and decades of regulation, it's hard to unwind that ball, right? At our last board meeting, we had a historian, and that was basically his thesis was it's really difficult to make much movement anymore, because we're just sort of at equilibrium or détente or something. We've got forces on all sides of the government that are arguing for different things, and it's difficult for them to move. But we do have to reinvent our infrastructure here. The comment was made yesterday that you can't go on an airport in the United States and not see a construction project. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We've got to rebuild things. You hear things that say half the built environment that's going to be here in 2015 is not even built yet. So the government's going to have to be a willing partner in this, and I'm optimistic that they can be. So hopefully I'm answering parts of your question. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? So as I said, my goal this morning was to be a bit provocative, also to relay that we are very serious about charting a bit of a new direction, actually a revolutionary direction for our industry. I really think that that's the purpose of a research and development center. Otherwise, if you just come here and we keep plowing the same territory and you keep hearing the same thing, there's ultimately not a lot of value. That's what I was talking about, these nuggets and key findings that are in the knowledge base. dig through that. There's going to be some nuggets and some key findings that you can take back and really improve your projects, improve your predictability, your profitability, and we're going to continue to accelerate that.